Hello and welcome to the Stacking Dingers Show, your home for all things underdog and DraftKings MLB Best Ball. I'm your host, Matthew, aka Sheep, aka Dark Sheep. You can find me, of course, online at T4RKSH33P_. And tonight, as usual, my co-host Billy Jones is here. Find him at SportsBizVJ. And this week's episode, we will be cracking open the skull and just seeing what is currently inside the mind of one of the Stacking Dingers founding members, the head of Underdog MLB, Mr. Brendan Tuma. Also, of course, writing his fantasy baseball goodness at brendantuma.substack.com and online at Too Much Tuma. Brendan, welcome back to the show. If for those who don't know, Brendan was kind of the guy that kicked off Stacking Dingers in a way. He was the guy who originally got together me and a few other people and kind of wanted to have a home for talking about this stuff. And so, yeah, welcome, Brendan. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me on. It's my first podcast or video appearance in a while. And kind of like what you alluded to, just thinking about, coming on what's been on my mind recently with like MLB Best Ball and kind of just sending you guys a list of kind of scattered notes that were things that I've been like thinking about recently. And yeah, excited to explore those topics with you guys. I view the two of you and, Stacking Dingers as kind of, having the pulse on kind of MLB Best Ball as much as anyone. So I'm really looking forward to this.
We certainly talk about it the most.
Before we get into it, don't you have some beef to address with Brendan?
I got business to address first, and then we'll get into the beef.
Okay.
No, I just want to remind everybody that if you become a YouTube member and support us here, you get access to a private Discord channel. The link is in the show description. And if you can't figure that out, just DM Billy and I, and we've been helping people get in there. We do need to shout out if you join at the higher tier. The only thing extra you get is a shout out on the show. So we have to shout out Best Ball Viper, the man, the myth, the legend. He joined at the Super Stacker tier. So that's the business. And just a reminder, I'll say this again until people stop doing it. If you pledge on our Substack, which is www.stackingdingers.com, that is not the same as joining the YouTube membership. So if you have done that and you think, hey, why can't I get into this Discord? Well, that's why. So be sure to make sure you're pledging at the right place. So with that, the beef, I'm kind of over it already, but because it was really quite true. Because Brendan is, I don't know how, this was a late night message. I don't know how like direct right now in your role you have to putting out the tweets from the Underdog MLB account, but the comparison of Jacob Mizorowski All-Star appearance to the Shader Sanders. I don't even know what his first name is, to be honest. The Sanders Pro Bowl, that kind of comparison, that hurt. I was angry at first, but really it's just that it hurt.
I can say that wasn't me. But I do love how like you thought of me, and I do love that it caused a little beef. I had forgotten about that Mizorowski moment. I do remember that like being a thing though around the All-Star break last year. There were like some veterans that were, I think like, was it Christopher Sanchez? Maybe him and Ranger Suarez weren't All-Stars. That's what rings the bell. But so yeah, that was a little bit of a thing with the account. I like to think that I don't want to take, credit for everything that's gone well with the account. And at the same time, I don't want to be blamed for the, when we run into trouble every now and then. So I try to keep my distance as much as I can in that sense, including enraging you about Mizorowski.
It was a funny little chuckle for sure. It was definitely commented on in the Discord.
Yeah. All right. So the first, we're gonna go through Brendan's bullet point list sent us, and we're just gonna see what's going on over there. First one we got here is forgetting everything I thought I knew, which is kind of last.
Yeah, I think your volume might be off, Matt. I don't know, unless it was me, but I saw Billy take his earbuds out too.
Yeah.
No, I had a problem. No, my computer screen went black, so I was clicking around and things popped up.
All right, everybody hear me good now, though?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then I will start again. But reading your Substack, over the last 6 months, I feel like you've kind of taken this. You've kind of changed your direction and approach to just fantasy baseball in general and player analysis and even your writing analysis. So, what specifically in Best Ball is this referring to?
I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to think about how to be good at fantasy, not even just Best Ball or DFS, but just home leagues with friends. How can you have a system that year after year is going to be repeatable? Yes, you're going to be open to variance. And it started forcing me to ask questions like, how much control do you really have in fantasy? I think we all like to think it's some combination of luck and skill. And but then I started really asking myself to what degree can my ball knowledge or understanding of how the scoring system works in fantasy, to what degree can I actually impact that? Is it 10%? Is it 70%? Kind of thinking through different formats and different games. I think poker is a great analogy in this sense. You can only play. I'm not a poker player, as you could probably tell by the way I'm kind of talking about it, but you can only play, the cards that you're dealt. And from there you gotta, kind of figure it out. So having kind of trying to take that step back for a while now in all forms of fantasy. And I think that with MLB Best Ball, it's such a niche game, and it's such a new game still, and it's such an underexplored game that I wanted to come into this off season and drafting. And again, I just do the admin draft that they allow underdog employees to do. And so this would all be a lot different if I was in, the actual dinger, in terms of just the ability that I've had to express these opinions in drafts and play the game. But yeah, this year more than ever, I wanted to come in, kind of build up from first principles and really take a step back and just say okay, what is this game? What does it reward from a fundamental level? Because one question that I get all the time that I'm curious what you guys answer, assuming that you get it, if people are getting new to underdog best ball, it's just people will ask what's kind of the meta, what do you want to do, how many of each position do you want to draft? That's kind of the most common first question. So kind of coming into this off season, I'm curious what you guys viewed as for lack of a better phrase, the meta of how to play best ball for baseball with the position requirements that we have.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I think there's 2 ways to think about it. Is how many players should you draft in total? There's a general consensus that you should be relatively balanced there. You don't want to be overloaded in one way or another. But then what has been the trend over the last years is a real heavy emphasis on outfielders, and you don't want to get beat at that position, and also a de-emphasis of pitching, which is I think they go hand in hand, right? As one goes up, the other one kind of goes down. I think that's been interesting, and see what happened last year is that pitching was pretty cheap, and the elites absolutely were awesome, and then they smashed. They were actually all the top 3 guys last year. All were spectacular in terms of advance rate. So I think that it's interesting you're saying what is the meta, because I think it has kind of shifted over time as data has become more available too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I feel like people are pretty set in the
And one thing that I also want to note is that something I'm starting to hear more is that with pitching, timing matters. So like as we're further away from the season, you're going to want to stay away from those 6-pitcher builds, because there's just pitchers die on you, and if you don't want to opt into a hurt player, player more likely to be hurt now. So, but when those type of builds become more interesting as you get closer to the season, and you kind of work your way through that first wave of injuries. So, I think that's something that I'm starting to hear a little bit more too.
Pitching, I forget, it was like Baseball America. Someone that I was speaking with referred to pitching as it's kind of like horse racing, where it's like you got to get like the arm built up, and then it kind of just like you let it run for like long time with a consistent routine. And what like so often happens with like pitcher injuries in baseball, it's like you get a little bit of a setback in like March or April. Now like you're off your routine, you're stopping and going. It's a real big issue for Best Ball. I remember a couple of years ago just being absolutely loaded up on Kyle Bradish, and then you get to spring training, and that injury can just like really hurt you. So that's a great point about pitching. Well, you guys mentioned about outfielders and just the consensus about being outfield early. To what round do you think that extends? Like my last recollection for this offseason was a top 3-4 round thing. It became especially in the first round, like, oh yeah, you don't want to take an infield in the first round. Outfield's more valuable. Is that more extreme now at all?
I think in the first 4 rounds, I was just pulling up a draft board that's a dinger that's like in the 5th round right now, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pitchers gone, and there's more than 7 outfielders gone in the first round alone. And like, let's 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there are more outfielders than infielders, but we're talking about like, okay, so there's a good example. In the 5th round, the infielders that are being taken are Trey Turner, Jazz Chisholm, Austin Riley, and like there's some question on marks on all of those guys, but already when we're looking at the outfielders, we have Byron Buxton, Teoscar Hernandez, and Jerickson Profar in that 5th round, and just like comparing those, like, yeah, these guys are getting pushed up a ton.
So maybe it's already starting, and maybe it is already more extreme than what I'm realizing. But again, as I kind of like talk through this, I'll be curious to what you guys say. So like I said, like I wanted to forget everything that I thought I knew heading into this off season, and just kind of again work from like first principles sort of thing. And one of the things I did early in the off season was listen to the episode you guys did where you had the multiple years of data of showing what positions were taken when, and then like how well those builds did. And I think the way a lot of people consume data these days is, okay, someone did the work, give me the TLDR, draft outfield early. And you could come away with that data with that conclusion, and, you would have got the most generalist idea from it. I rewatched it. I was, legitimately pausing the video, looking at it, internalizing the information, would leave to go run an errand, think about it, come back, keep watching, and seeing how the teams that did, best were built out consistently. And you can start crossing off, okay, investing a bunch early in pitcher and infield, that doesn't work, so we can cross that off, sort of thing. And when I did that whole process, viewing it from this first principles mindset, what I came away with was outfield. It's not so much that you just wanted to, get a couple early to make sure you don't get boxed out, but you wanted to be the tidal wave of this guy just keeps taking outfielders. There's actually none left, and it's a race to that last available one. Almost viewing it as I want to build a team that's consistently starting an outfielder in the flex. I don't know. Do you build teams with that mindset, or is this pushing it a little farther than what you generally see? I'm curious your guys' thoughts.
I actually think I want an infielder in the flex because as you go through the draft, infielders are going to be generally better picks. They're just 1-to-1. I think it's really interesting you say the race to being the last outfielder. There is a pretty, I think, clear line. It's, I don't know, somewhere around TJ Friedel where it starts to completely drop off. And Brenton Doyle, not much further after that. You're oh my God, these names are gross. So it's I don't think I've come to the conclusion you definitely want some stars and you want to have some in that mid-range, but you don't want to have to be shopping for multiple guys and that past the fall off. And that's what I've gotten to. So because I do think that with the way that outfielders have been pushed up now, you're going to probably have a really, I don't want to call it dead zone, but a very flat, long tier of production. They're all pretty good. Nothing really separating. That at that point. And so I think you just need a stable of guys that can get you enough floor at outfield and then you win it through some stars in infield. At least the way I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, because you get to that point and you're talking about guys that are, that's where you start to get your Kerry Carpenters, your Euler Abreu's, Sal Frelick is going at 168, which, was a pure volume guy last year. Ramon Laureano is going at 170. I think that is the perfect proof of what we're talking about, and just how it's throughout the draft of outfielders being pushed up. So yeah, we also had, when we were talking, had our roundtable of max drafters, and Spencer said, "Hey, I'm trying to get my sixth outfielder at Dalton Varsho and be done." Most drafts, that was kind of a strategy that he was going with. So yeah, that is what you are thinking. I think maybe not to the extreme of fitting them in your flex, because you still have, just for pure mathematics, the infielders are scoring more. So pushing your outfield to the flex is maybe not the best probability type play. But yeah, that mindset of I don't even want to mess around with outfield. I think that is taking hold.
I think the goal is to draft 6, to not have to invest a 7th pick in a guy that you're not likely to get a ton out of. I want that 7th in a pitcher that's I'm going to lose someone and I need some volume somewhere, or I want a shot at an infielder that can be impactful. If that's 1 week or across the whole season. So yeah, I'm trying to just draft less in total.
Yeah, I find myself going, I guess, as I'm thinking about it, having 5 and then just kind of a gamble even on the 6th. I'm fine with that more so than wanting 6, solid picks.
Yeah, the flex thing it's definitely more mindset driven than actually having your outfield having an outfielder score in the flex spot. But it's like that's the way I want to think about, that outfield depth and thinking about how that could create teams that score in a very different way than, just initially the rest of your teams, in your draft. And then eventually as you get into like the playoff weeks, like what could that possibly look like? And then so I talked about, I wanted to do this from like first principles and, first coming to me, now that we have 4 years of data, there was one thing doing this stuff in 2023 when, it was really like almost like a year and a half's worth of data with how small some of the beginning tournaments was and some of like the structure stuff going on. I just felt like this year was the right year to really, get back in tune with what has worked historically, just to kind of have that framework for heading into drafts. And, I do think that, of course, there would come a point where outfield gets, pushed too high. I think, in football, we've seen that over the past couple of years with receiver, where it can become a point where it becomes like inefficient. And I think before getting into any sort of like player analysis, when I was just kind of, looking at like MLB Best Ball this way, I don't know if we've reached that point. I think you could argue like it should be a game that has like 2 outfield spots and maybe like a second flex. Like that's how big of a difference I think it might be making. And then the last way that I was like thinking about this is I think it's so hard to have your edge come from nailing like this specific late round player who's going to do well, better than the market expects, and it's going to be at the right time and in the right way, the right scoring that I need from them at that moment in time. And I'm almost like asking myself, is right now in this game, is there more of an edge to be had with that sort of thinking of player analysis, of like finding a diamond in the rough? Or could there just be an overarching structural edge where it makes sense to take 5 outfield in your first 7 picks and just really have that be a dominant strength, not just across a single team, but across your entire portfolio? That's kind of the line of thinking I was messing around with at the start of this offseason, the way I was kind of trying to build teams. There's nuance, of course, infielders fall past ADP, want to still get some exposure. I don't love every outfielder. Some go earlier than they should, others go later than they should. So there's a bunch of nuance required with that. But like to me, that seems like the biggest opportunity in the game right now is to find a really big structural edge that you can implement over, all 150 drafts in the dinger.
I think if you have good structure, your base like expectation is no longer that like 2 out of 12. I think you can raise that pretty quickly. Where you're going, but I think that is also limited to the ceiling and how much better like off of that 2 out of 12 you're going to get. If you nail like the Brent Rooker from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever it was, the Cal Raleigh from last year, like there is no structural edge that's going to match that. So like, but I think that's much harder to nail consistently year over year. Whereas I think if you walk in year over year drafting good structured teams, you think 150 teams back to back to back years, you're going to get across a couple hundred teams in there of good structure. Something's going to fall your way. So like that's how I think about it. So that's on like last year I was like way overweight some players, and I'm really going to try not to do that this year.
I think like. About like being overweight players or not. It's like if I want to be overweight anything right now, it is kind of this like, really heavy outfield tilting. Like I'd rather be more overweight to that as a concept than a specific player right now. That's kind of where I feel like the imbalance is in the edge in the game. Again, to the point where like, what if everyone pushed it? Like what if everyone really pushed it at outfield? And like I try to think about it like through that lens. Like what do I not want, my opponents to do? Or what could the rest of the room do that would make me uncomfortable? Because that can almost expose then what is the most like precious asset to be getting early and often.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about in terms of like you watch like a stream NFL draft from the major names there, and they're all pushing wide receivers early for the most part, and their audience is pushing wide receiver early. So you see those draft rooms, I think, turn into what you're talking about. If people if like you get in a room with everybody pushing outfielder, you can see like a parallel there in the terms of like how the draft board falls and how you just you can get boxed out completely outfield on those types of stream drafts. You can do that at outfielder for baseball.
If I was going to say there aren't many MLB streamers, but those that do stream their drafts, you see that concept happen. If we were to stream a draft, I would assume it would be one of the most outfield heavy drafts like in the tournament, just because of the community that's going to understand you can't get beat, and it's going to be like a bidding war, and you're going to watch these guys just fall down the board. And when I did one season of streaming, and those drafts were just like the lightest pitcher drafts that you would see across the entire tournament, I feel like. And I knew it was coming, and I could take advantage of it. So yeah, I think that the market is. I think there's more room to grow in that space, that direction.
And so when I'm thinking about all this, and again, the whole outfield heavy thing, what makes it so appealing to me is how the rest of the draft and the positions, if you do 5 outfield through 7 rounds, the way that the rest of your draft flows is just perfect, because you're not competing with any of those kind of dead zone-ish outfield picks, and you're looking to build up quickly on pitchers and infields, especially in the double-digit rounds, and other managers aren't. And then I think the thing, about infield versus outfield that I kind of finally put my finger on the pulse, and it's so obvious to say it out loud, but it really just is that it's not that there's like less outfielders. It's that there's so many more infielders that play every day, and if you are building a team that's robust in the outfield, that you might have 3 of the top 10 highest scoring outfielders because of the way you drafted, and you cap it at 6, and then so maybe you go 7 or 8 infielders, and there's a way to build a team that way that's it's all volume infielders, because you really can do that. You can't do that in the outfield. When later rounds in the outfield, it's going to be platoon guys, like the Kerry Carpenters of the world. I really like Kerry Carpenter, of course. Who amongst us doesn't? But you do got to kind of think through the math of like in a week, is he going to get platooned? Is he going to come out middle of the game? All that sort of stuff. And at infield, there are just more positions, shortstop being the primary one, where guys don't platoon, and there's obviously more infield positions. And so, yeah, there's just so many more guys who play every day. And then, so I just view that as that at that point, you're playing, like you're rolling dice with all your infielders. It's like, I'm going to, kind of try to bet on having the best highest scoring outfield. Then the infielders, I'm going to have 8 guys who play every day, and I just need 3 of them to be hot any given week over the course of the season. So like the way the whole draft just kind of comes together, makes it really appealing, I think.
Yeah. I do want to kind of push back a little bit. We kind of the foundation of this discussion is based on the data that we've seen in roster construction, and that the data that we have and that we look at, it pays to say that that's advance rate data that we're looking at for that. So that that is under the mindset of, hey, I want to get the most teams to the playoffs, and then let the chips fall where they may. The other thing with that data is that the percentage edges that you're getting of is only 2-3% on some of the structures, so it's like I think it pays still to be open to being, again, taking the below rate advance rate if that works out for a season. Like, let's say this season we have, I guess like the equivalent, since we're kind of talking football, the equivalent is, last year when the Saquon year, for the running back position, that really, running back really mattered. So, I mean, there's a chance that there's a couple of early round infielders that you might just need to have this year. There's always the chance of something like that happening. And then if you're playing that and you're ahead on that guy because you weren't, you're giving up some advance rate to be different, I think there is still some value in thinking about roster construction in terms of going against the grain too.
And with roster construction, it's almost as like those charts told you what you can't do as much as it is like you must do this. Like this, if you follow this flow, you are swimming upstream, and good luck. You're gonna have to nail every player take downstream afterwards. And so like that's not the type of game I want to play, because I'm not like, I know some baseball, but I wouldn't call myself an elite ball knower. Like that's not the edge I'm trying to press. That's just kind of the way I think of it.
I think that's, and again, like my whole thing about forgetting everything I knew and kind of coming into this year, just trying to with like a fresh mindset. But my point is that this is like a weird game. It's like a warped version of like best ball, of like fantasy baseball, with the scoring and the positions. And that's why I don't want to come in with this preconceived notion that I have to be balanced, because the roster setting is telling me 3 pitchers, 3 infielders, 3 outfielders. And so, okay, it's round 7 and I got 3 of one, 2 of one, 2 of another. Like that's how I feel like most people would come into this. Like I wanted to, approach this from what can I do, not in a single draft, but across, dozens of drafts, that if I just get this, that I don't know if you want to call it, like plus EV or like whatever the term for you there is, but like that this is what's gonna give me a bigger edge, rather than trying to say, here in January that Connor Griffin is gonna be that good and I'm going to take him in 85% of drafts, and then I'm at the mercy of, how he does and how he performs during like the pivotal weeks and that sort of thing. I know those are 2 extremes, but like I'm just trying to, think through, what do we have better odds at, and then on top of that, like if you're right, like what comes from that. And so, yeah, that's kind of the way I was thinking about it. Around the holidays, I'm referring to all these strategy games I don't play much of. Like I referenced poker before. And around the holidays with my wife and in-laws, we were playing a lot of Catan. And I don't know if you guys play Catan, but I don't like normally play it. But I like it because it's, there's like some strategy involved, but then you need to roll the dice to go your way. Again, it reminds me of fantasy a little bit in that sense. And it's just one of these games where it's like if you get boxed out of like a certain, element or a certain angle path to winning, it's just killer. And this was around the time that the bullpen had come out. And yeah, it was just making me think, this is like, Catan was like a new game to me. So I'm trying to figure out like what's a consistent strategy approach I can take. And then it was around the time that the bullpen came out, and I just was trying to ask myself, like, what is a fresh look that I can take at this game that might, trying to simplify it for me before I get into the nitty gritty of barrel rate and expected WOBA and all that stuff.
I think that's a great thought. Don't have too much to add to that, but because Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, like, so from there, there's one more thing about like the whole outfield thing that I wanted to address, because it does, you can get like a little bit over leverage in outfield. Like, do you have enough infield points? That what if another team has Vlad and Kurt? Like, how can you like match that if they are both like league winners this season? At the flip side, I would say that team wouldn't have like necessarily the outfield points you have, but like. So how do you recover from it? And I think that we like to think we have an edge in player analysis. I think most everyone who's playing this game thinks they do. How many of us really do that is probably people would be pretty surprised if they would ever get like fully evaluated on that. I feel like, maybe even like myself included, but like, But like where I want to come out with like the edge again, it's not just like, oh, I have this secret rookie that nobody knows about. Again, I'll come back to Connor Griffin, take him around 17 every time. Like, sure, like maybe something like that could work. But like the way that I was thinking about it with player analysis and the edge you have is, because this is how I felt about it, I was happening in my drafts, especially once you get to around 10 on. Is it's a little bit more that like every round you can, I feel like I can get like 8th round value in the 9th. And I feel like I can get 9th round value in the 11th. And as you kind of go on, I feel like you can, if you're looking at projections or, again, it's just the whole infield outfield thing or you're just a really good ball knower, then that's kind of the way you can kind of make up being a little lighter on early round pitching and infield is through that. And, maybe that's like famous last words, just, pick the right players, but it's a little bit less like, pick the right players out of thin air and more, find one structural edge with another structural edge. Maybe it's, like projections or scoring profiles or whatever it is, but kind of like stack those two ideas kind of like on top of each other.
I do want to pause you really quickly. What round did you say Connor Griffin was going in?
Like the 16th.
Well, so I wonder if this is a different, because we're different environments. He's now in the 13th round for us on the dinger. And so that he's the type of player that's just going straight up through the roof. It's kind of wild.
Yeah. That's starting to get like a little bit. The smoke alarm went off on him for me. Hassan had like an early off-season preview. This was around the time everyone was trying to blow smoke up the Pirates, saying they're going to spend all this money and that they made an offer to Schwarber. And honestly, if you look, it's been a pretty underwhelming offseason since they got that whole round of applause. But Hassan really early in the offseason was calling out Griffin as someone who's going to have a chance to make the opening day roster. I think his price held late for a while. It sounds like it's rising now. Spring training right around the corner. Now is not the time to do it. At this point, like, I want to see what he looks like in spring, because what if it's like a Christian Campbell situation? But
yeah,
just the idea of like player analysis at one at a time. Again, we all want to nail the Brent Rooker, the Cal Raleigh, like those sort of things. Like, to me, though, that's impossible to figure out ahead of time. Like, again, like I'm going back to how I was talking about at the start of the show, is how I'm trying to like ask, what can I actually control in playing fantasy sports versus what impact does that have on how I perform? And again, it's just going to be impossible if you tell me like, who's the breakout player. None of us are going to be able to do that. But I do think there are ways to be able to make better picks 1 or 2 rounds at a time,
or crossing off names that are just bad picks. Like it's part of like the player analysis, or I think a bigger part of the player analysis that people don't highlight is just staying away from those landmines. If you can do that and then be flat across the rest of your players, one, you're going to have, because you're now no longer drafting at like a 1 out of 12 rate. You're drafting at like a 1 out of 10 per round. And then additionally, like that you're just not like sinking a team and allowing for when you do get that league winner, your team is set up to do it. So I think that's I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
The more I play fantasy, like the less certain I get about things. I feel like 3-4 years ago, I was very, like this guy is the guy. There's only one universe the whole way this plays out, and he's going to be good in it. And over time, it just humbles you. Like it really does. Like even this year, like I'm sitting around watching Derrick Henry in like a lot of football analogies. I know trying to be like a pro baseball show, but like. I'm Derrick Henry, the oldest guy we've been betting against his efficiency for like 6 years now, and he has like the biggest game ever in like the most important week, and I just throw my hands up in the air. I'm just like, the game will like humble you in that way, and I've become a lot less, I don't know what the word is, like I have a lot less bravado in terms of just even how I obviously have some players that perform more than others, especially at the prices they go at, but just I have such a wider range of outcomes for how those situations could play out than I used to a few years ago even.
Yeah, and I do want to add a couple things about, the player analysis side of things and trying to find the certain players that fit certain molds and that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of flaws in the way that we like look at that after the fact. Like after, we have our takes at the beginning and during draft season, and then there's flaws when we look at it afterwards. Because what we look at is where we were right. We don't look at where we were wrong. We highlight the couple of guys that we had, 25% exposure to that had a above average advance rate, and then we just focus on that. Like you said, it's kind of random. So like then when we go the next year, we take a look at, like this year somebody posted, I saw a post trying to find, or comparing Hunter Goodman's stats last year to the 2 years ago Cal Raleigh stats, and there's a ton of like overlap there, but and that's fine. Like I certainly see what you're going for there. I think that's good. Like finding the stats and comparing is good, but like what you're trying to find is like historic things happening like 1-to-1. It's the same year after year, and we know that just does not happen, right? We know someone is probably going to have a huge advance rate, but the chance of somebody having a 40% over 40% advance rate and it being the same profile of player just like is next to nothing.
Yeah, and you and I were on Twitter recently talking about someone that kind of like fits a little bit about what you're saying for me, and like I'm just like less concerned about like being right from a like whole season perspective, like because we were talking about Kyle Stowers, and he's someone who I think he could have a year that's not even worth what he is going at ADP, and is like kind of a letdown, but has like a crazy hot month or two, and maybe it'll be in the playoffs. And I know like you can say that about like everyone sort of thing, but I just like I'm trying to build teams that have that like juice to it, because I saw Stowers on multiple occasions last year. He started hot, and then he had the dip, and then he had the hot, and we just want to capture that hot. So if you build a 6 outfielder team, I've done that with Stowers as my 6th outfielder. Like at that point, you're not asking a whole lot from him. So when you're thinking about building a team, it's like I don't want Brian Reynolds as my 6th outfielder on a team like that where I went like outfield really strong, because I just want, when Stowers makes my lineup, it's going to be when he's combining the homers and RBI and on base ability, and it happens in these like short bursts. I've been really trying to think through that upside of the combination of the barrel rate and the on base skills and the ability to be in the lineup every day. Again, that's where Kerry Carpenter starts to scare me a little bit, or any platoon hitter. But yeah, that's the way I'm trying to think through these profiles.
I love that, especially later in the draft and you're filling out the bottom of your roster. You don't need more floor. If you have a bunch of you have 3 top 100 infielders, you probably have solid floor with that at that point. So you should be looking for guys that can make meaningful impact to your lineup in a short sprint or across the season. But it's why Michael Toley last year, keep coming back to this, was a disaster. He got sent down to the minor leagues, but he still was going to be a better pick than certain players that played the entire season because he had big weeks. And that's impactful in a game like this. So those type of profiles and knowing how that plays in this game, and that's just entirely different than what Roto is such a huge edge in my opinion.
I called it on this list of things I had sent you projections trap, because it's okay. So now we're moving a couple more levels. It's we go in totally fresh, forget everything we learned. Okay, now I know the history of, like you said, Billy, to these are the starts and builds to avoid that we know don't do well. Okay, I think there's this projection edge in terms of outfield versus infield and when you can get them at different points of the draft. And then so what's the next thing you can build off of? I want to draft off projections. Let's try to make sure we're in the ballpark. I've been doing a lot with projections this offseason, not even for best ball, just for I have a Substack. I do a lot of fantasy writing. I play in some really competitive head-to-head categories leagues, but I also play Roto. I've been spending a lot of time looking at projections, specifically the ones on Fangraphs, understanding the inputs that go into them. And one of the biggest things to understand is where the playing time comes from for those, because it has such a huge impact on if you just plug in the underdog scoring, use the projection. It's so dependent on the playing time. If you poke around certain guys, you go to Pete Crow Armstrong's page, look at the projections, the play appearances are so different. And even for more established guys, that can be the case. And so it really depends what projection system you're using. But then on top of that, you're getting a full season long projection. And again, the example I made with Stowers, or I'm trying to think of some of these other outfielders. I have taken a decent amount of Byron Buxton, famous last words, but just kind of really focusing on, it's not even a health thing with him. It's can this guy give me a month? Because one thing that I'm learning just the more following the sport is almost everyone gets hot for a stretch point. I picture someone like Marcus Semien, not the player you think about who has underdog best ball upside. He had some horrible stretches last year, but then he also had stretches where he was scalding hot. And so it's really a lot of these guys get you think about a hitter's ultimate season batting line. It's not usually a 1-for-3 with a walk every single day. It's a lot of peaks and valleys. And what you want is to capture as much of the peak. You want that peak to be as high it can be, and you want as many peaks as possible. And so ultimately where I came out, and this is just a guess, my guess is if you took someone's 150 dinger drafts and they used projections versus someone's 150 dinger drafts and they didn't use projections, that the projections one would win. But I think there's a third level. I think the projection can get you kind of in the ballpark and can help you maybe understand how underdogs or DraftKings or whatever.
Oh, we lost you. Did your earpods die?
hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Oh.
What's that?
I lost my train of thought.
Oh.
Well, yeah, you're talking about how there's like we're on the third level, right? So you can draft projections versus not projections. Projections are likely going to win, particularly on a season long level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then once you start to like understand what those projections really mean in the profile that those players are going to produce with because players aren't just we get a total number, but like they're not going to score in total like that. They're going to have individual weeks that they're going to contribute, and so like, understanding that and what that means, like they're going to score like this, and so that's going to hit my lineup like this. Is that like that third level of understanding and how it's going to all kind of come together?
Yeah, I think that maybe people have done like studies on this or something, but like I remember seeing some visuals on Twitter at some point, but like I would want, like a multi-year study and for me to feel like really good about this, but like where do like underdog points come from? I'm guessing it's like homers, RBIs, walks, like that's, and like, having a week where you hit like multiple homers and drive in a ton of runs and you're also like getting on base. Like that's what I picture is. It's not the only way to do it, obviously. But that's kind of like, just like the go-to mold that I picture. And so what I would want to do is, okay, so what are those stats that are hitting your underdog lineup? It's, let's say, homers, walks and RBIs and, steals, and kind of assign a value to each, figure out, where those points come from. And, okay, those stats, how can we best predict that? Like, what best predicts homers? Is it like previous homers per plate appearance? Is it barrel rate? If you do barrel rate, you have to take a 3-year weighted average. Or can you just look at last year's and kind of go down by down? Okay, we want to project homers. Let's not just use the bad X. Let's take all 4 original projection systems and aggregate that homer total. There's different ways you can go about it like that, but I think that makes a lot more sense than just using like a single projection system and just kind of relying on that as like, almost your default ranking. I used to do that. And so like, I'm kind of like updating my like process to the world. And again, it's a totally okay thing to you, but I think there's still like more layers deeper to go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I have a chart that's kind of what you're talking about. I haven't really done a ton of like work or talked about it a ton, but this scoring is mostly in extra base hits, then runs and RBIs, because that's what this game is. Singles, stolen bases aren't a huge driver of a ton of like weekly scoring, and we do know that that's the case. But then what it's easy to do ordinal ranks of players based on projections, whether that's per plate appearance, per game, totals, like that's easy. Once you want to say like that number is there's like noise in that number that I don't like, and you have to strip that out and come up with your own rankings and subjectively who I want to be targeting and stuff like that, that becomes real tricky. And that's what I've really struggled with in terms of building my rankings is like, I have a lot of the components that I know are important, but how do I then turn that into a ranking set that I can go draft off of? Or is that even bad for me to do and I should just use ADP and just have my targets within ADP and let that be like the construct that I follow, and I just like cross off players that I don't want. So I think it is like, as you said, like this third level that becomes incredibly complex.
I like that line of thing, because even so in my main, like my most competitive league is my home league. It's a head-to-head categories league. We do this thing where you like pick your draft order slot, and so I have like the 6th pick to pick, where I want to pick in the stake draft for this year. And so now I'm doing the thinking of like, okay, what makes the most sense? Just like, if everyone drafts in the order that I think they should, where would I want to pick? And then you have to say, oh, but what's the market going to do? And then, or like, what are all my friends going to do like for their picks? And should I factor that in? And could I maybe get this guy then that like, a little bit later of a value than otherwise? And so like, I think where I ultimately come back to
having done a lot of that type of thinking across different modes of fantasy sports over the past year, is that like I want to lean into what I feel the structural edges, regardless of what like the market is doing. And again, that's where I come back to like the outfield thing, that kind of has been like the theme of the show tonight, where we were talking about. I had one other thing I was going to say, but slipped my mind.
Yeah, I would just want to add on, we every year we go into this like, oh yeah, we're going to provide rankings, and then we get to the exercise of doing the rankings, and I just feel then like I'm doing everything wrong. Right? Like you're talking about, Billy, like looking at, or maybe not that I'm doing wrong, is that I know that I'm missing something in my methodology of doing the rankings. And it kind of follows that layer that we were talking, okay, I can look, here is the aggregate over the year of what my favorite projection system says. Maybe I take two averages, I'm adding another layer there. And then I'm like, oh, what, maybe I should add another projection set in. And then, you're looking at that and then you're like, oh, I also need to factor the per plate appearance. And it's like, yeah, it's just, I like spiral out of control every year we sit down. Cause the thing is, people want rankings, maybe I'm trying to make an excuse here why, we always say we're going to have rankings and then we never really provide them very well, or then update them, is because I don't feel like I can do rankings the right way. I feel like it's impossible to have all of the thought that goes into actually picking guys in a draft into a set of rankings, because once you get past the per plate appearance, then you're thinking about team structure, and then you're thinking about, then you have to factor in ADP, like I need to make sure that this guy isn't too far ahead of ADP, because if somebody's just drafting like without thinking that, and that's why like
rankings can't come with an instruction manual. Like that doesn't, it's not functional. Like, but that's what needs to happen if you're going to do it, because people are going to blindly take them and just like stick them in and be like, well, this is what I drafted. And so it's just like, it's a lot more nuanced and complex of a process. And I like respect the shit out of companies that do this and sell them, and like people love it because it is like an intense process, I feel like. And the moment you publish them, they're stale. Something has happened. So, and then you just feel like, so I almost would rather give people a process that I can go for and then do it yourself.
I mean, that's the point of the show, is talking about process, and, but people want the shortcuts, and that's fine. I understand you don't want to, you don't have all the time to sit and spend thinking about it as much as we do. And I understand that, but really the way to be successful, like every time that I have, we do these rankings, and then I usually about the end of the bullpen, I'll start drafting off my rankings that I want to publish. And then, I'll start building that way, and then I'll get all the same guys. And then I get to the point where it's like, I'd rather just see by ADP. Now that I've done this process, I know these numbers behind the scenes, the overall, the point per at bat or point per plate appearance or whatever you're looking at, then you just have to like internalize that kind of stuff, and then look at ADP. That's just how the progression, like the last 3 years, has gone for me as to, if I'm drafting off my own rankings or not.
I just remembered also the other thing I was going to say, which is, and so I did this for Roto, but because I can't play like the main contest, it hasn't been yet worth the time for me, but it's a content idea that I was going to do at some point for MLB Best Ball. But something I did in addition to projections is for Roto leagues, I took Fangraph's auction calculator from the past few seasons and, import it all into a sheet. And then, so let's say, Vlad Jr., I have his like past 3 years, like the dollar amount that Fangraphs auction calculator said he was worth, and that gave me a historical baseline for what he's done. And then I took a composite of all the projection systems, and I said, okay, now what is he projected to do this year? And then I normalized those into percentiles so that the dollar values weren't off or anything. And then I kind of took those two columns and put them next to each other. And then I made it wasn't 50-50. It was a little bit heavier on the projection than the historical, but then it gave me one number, and it's okay, here's my ranking, and I understand the methodology that I used to get here. It was basically 2/3, projection, and 1/3 what have they actually done historically. And so the historical guys, you get dinged if you hurt, if you play an underperforming, all that sort of stuff. It's not the most perfect system in the world for a number of reasons, but I thought that this, was really helpful for me to bake in, what actually happens. And it was so funny looking at the list of the guys side by side to see, in my final number, were they getting more from their historical performance or from the projection performance? And it's I'm sure you guys could guess some of them, but Vlad Jr., I'm oh, his ranking is coming a lot more from the projection than what he's actually done. And so that's just another reason why not to lean too heavily into projections. Tatis is someone who has underperformed his projections a bunch the past couple years. That doesn't mean you don't take him. That doesn't mean that this year is going to be right for the projection. But the way that I was coming up with this formula just baked some of that in. And again, it goes the other way too. Just off the top of my head, Francisco Lindor has historically the past few years performed a lot better than what he's projected. And so he's someone who, if you're just using projections, he ended up getting a bump. And that's the type of thing I would want to look at for underdog too. And I think if you just stare at the historical values for underdog, whether it's the per plate appearance stuff that you're talking about, that you would kind of over time develop that sixth sense for what the profile is that you're looking for. That Billy was talking about, the extra base hit profile, and that would start to become a little bit more natural looking for that if we looked at how these guys actually performed over the years and in a big macro data heavy way.
Yeah, I mean, if you're out there, people, and you want to do that, go ahead.
I don't play dailies, but my guess is that would just help again, kind of with scoring, because it's not intuitive. I feel I know what 20 half PPR points is. I can just see a box score and kind of quickly do the math in my head, but no one really knows what's a 44-point night offensively for someone. It's just not the same. So it kind of feels okay, this is the profile we want. Kyle Stowers hits a bunch of homers in a short period of time. Okay, that just happened. Now let me look at the actual numbers, and it's oh, that wasn't as much as I thought it was. So it's that's the value you can get from actually looking at what happens historically. Again, I did it all through a roto lens, but it was pretty eye opening.
Yeah, and I think you can. People who play daily probably can do that for the daily in MLB. Okay, I know
especially
this
for pitching
or a guy that hits home run, but now we're at a different time period. The week-long scoring time period is I don't think that we know that off. Just naturally we know what a good week. I mean, we know a lot of home runs is good, right? But what other combination of stats? How many extra bases can catch a guy on a medium home run week? So yeah,
and it's particularly hard with best ball because once you draft it, it's not like you're directly impacting any of the thing that happens, or watching it very closely, unless you're in the playoffs and you have one team that's riding in and you're following that team really closely. like you're not going to see what all of the noise that happens across the season. So like doing a deep dive and really getting like sharp with how players score is it's just not going to come naturally.
I had one more point about pitching, and then I also wanted to share my fun no matter what player on the way out. But something I wanted to ask you guys about pitching is, and I haven't done it this, rigidly, but I used to, like 3-4 years ago, I was like so into the quality start component because I was playing in a head-to-head categories league that was very quality start heavy. And so like 2022, I remember, got to get Adam Wainwright and like Marcus Stroman and like these late, quality start type guys who could get a win also. And, that's kind of why I wanted to forget, the whole like forget everything I thought I knew thing. I think it was like last year being on with you guys, you really, pumping K percentage to me, for pitching. And, I took note of that and just kind of, again, like over the course of the year, like, maybe playing a daily contest here or there, like you see, it's like, okay, the start where it's like 7 innings, 12 strikeouts, just like that's how you can notice like how it scores. So what I did to draft pitchers is I took everyone's strikeout rate from the past 3 years, and then I weighted it a little bit to weigh like the most recent year more heavily. And, like 2 years ago, a little bit less than that. And then a year ago, a little bit less than that. And there are some like really big outliers that come up with ADP in terms of the draft. And I've kind of just been saying like, screw it. I am going down the K percent. Also look at strikeout minus walk rate, just to make sure, that sleazeball Mizurowski doesn't come up too high on my list. But I've just kind of been going off like, strikeout rate and strikeout minus walk rate, again, with a little bit of a special cocktail of a 3-year average from the past 3 years. And kind of just saying to myself, like, look, like Tyler Glasnow is going to have some ugly starts this year. I don't care. It doesn't affect it's my cat scratching the door. It doesn't affect me. I just want the starts where he gets 12 strikeouts and he gets a win and a quality start, and that's all I care about.
Yeah, and when it comes to looking at just the strikeout rate, because I think when you look at what is tied to scoring, it's innings pitched and strikeouts, and we know one of those is more predictable than the other, and it's the strikeout rate. Like we think we know which pitchers are going to get good amount of innings. We have workhorses that we like to draft, and we know progressions of young players, how they get innings added, but ultimately we're terrible at predicting the innings a guy's going to get. Like once you factor in injuries and just team context changes that are unpredictable, the actual innings part, which is the most important thing to a pitcher, is how many innings they pitch in a game and also over the course of the the whole season. But we don't know that number, but we do know the K minus BB, and we know that that's pretty good to look at year over year. And
it's like a really pretty predictive stat. I have a chart here that Fangraphs writer name is Jeff Zimmerman. He writes this book called The Process, and he does a bunch of like studies. It's all like for Roto fantasy baseball, but you pick up a lot of stuff just from reading it. And he had a stat just about how well each pitching stat predicts another pitching stat, if that makes sense. So it's like how well does Stuff Plus predict whip, but also how well does Stuff Plus predict walk rate, and all these sort of stuff. And so there's probably like 1, 2, 3, there's like the 5 or 6 Roto pitching stats, and then he had like 10 advanced metrics. And out of all of those combinations and permutations, like the number one most predictive thing, and it's not close, is strikeout rate predicting next year's strikeout rate. And then you add on like aging curves on top of that, and my cat is being so much at the door. I'm so sorry.
You said this was coming.
But anyways, yeah, I've been really focusing on strikeout rate. Tyler Glass now really pops in it. Sonny Gray really pops. I'm trying to think who else did. Nick Lodolo is like the one late guy who I felt like I was getting, some, bat missing upside. I have to take a look at who else was there, but it's surprising. And then another thing I want to say with strikeout rate, from an aging curve perspective, it usually doesn't bounce back up. So once you see a year or two decline, it's really easy to get caught in like off-season narratives. He's doing this to regain velocity. He's mixing.
He went
up
to
his
Driveline.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and not to say that doesn't happen. Like some guys will gain velocity, after losing it, or gain strikeouts after losing them, of course. But it's very rare and it's hard to predict. And so, like, the point is that once you see that strikeout rate slippage, that's like kind of like for me, becoming like a big red flag. It happened for Corbin Burns a couple years ago. Obviously, he then got hurt, but he's someone you look at his strikeout rates from pretty recently, and it's it's not who you think of when you think of Corbin Burns, and he's just an example of someone. Again, injury aside, once you see that strikeout rate dip, I don't want to bet on that ever coming back. I'm treating that as like, okay, like he's no longer the guy he was. Like that's the degree to which I'm building my entire, pitching analysis for this game around strikeout rate.
Great stuff. Great stuff. All right. So then, who is your no matter what player before we get out of here?
Really fun, concept. And for me, this is someone who's just been a fan favorite of mine for a number of years. I think a lot of times when we think about upside in fantasy, it's always, someone new, someone we haven't seen before, someone doing something we haven't seen before. Connor Griffin, again, like the most obvious example this year heading into spring training. But, it's always rookies, second-year players. One of my favorite, forms of upside is the veteran upside. This past year, Devontae Adams, to me, was a real strong case of like a veteran who I thought like had upside and was like mispriced. And, I just love those types of players. This guy is not as good as Devontae Adams. And but it's a similar type idea where he's just like getting old and people are just not taking him because he's gold or because he's old. And I just went through basically an entire show talking about not, predicting perfect, sort of dream runouts. But this guy is not going to be a season-long winner, I don't think. But when we talk about this profile, I'm curious your guys' thoughts on him. It's Max Muncy, and I'm just like so blown away by how free he is because like left-handed infielder with crazy StatCast metrics and a really good lineup. It sounds to me like a lot like Ben Rice, who goes just like so much earlier. Of course, he's a lot younger. He's going to hit higher in that order than Muncy will hit in his. But the Dodgers thing, there's not that many chances to get the Dodgers. They're going to get all these, free counting stats that are going around. Most of them go pretty early, but then, a little bit later, you can get, even like a Teoscar. But again, with the outfield thing with him and Pajes, they go early. Will Smith, he's just never going to get a full week of playing time. So he's got to be like crazy efficient to hit the lineup. And then, Muncy will get platooned, a little bit, but it's kind of like the Stowers thing to me, where when he gets hot, it is just such a force of nature. And he is one of like the way I've been building teams to get him late in infield. Oh my God, it's just like, it's perfect for the way that I've been building. And so, he's one of my favorites and has been for a long time.
Well, I'm glad you said that because like I've been struggling to find just generally like more names later in the draft. I kind of can always end up consolidating around a couple players, and right now it's pitching. I'm really liking in that last round. So to have an infielder that you're kind of referencing, I do like that, and a lot of great points, especially being like a cheap piece attached to what is definitely going to be the best offense in the major leagues.
But I think there's like an epidemic with, people opening someone's baseball savant page and, treating that as analysis. So I try to like fight that. But I mean, just like, really, I don't think people realize what like Muncie's looked like last year and, how strong it's looked for like the past few years. So it's definitely one that's worth checking out.
Well, I have 30% of them in the bullpen, so I'm
Oh,
right
yeah.
there with you. I'm adding in Will Smith to that pair, and even if it's a small Dodger stack at the end, just to put those two guys together. I think the reason why he has just like not moved up, despite I've mentioned him, he's just kind of holding his ADP right now. It comes down to what we were talking about earlier, where everybody is, the basis of drafting right now is these season-long projections. I think the playing time in his projections just makes him not pop in those numbers, and the combine that with the age and injury stuff from last year. I think that's why he hasn't hit that rise. But I think I would hope that people start doing it, because I think it's otherwise I'm just going to keep drafting him there too.
Yeah, he is. Again, I've always had like he's always just been like one of my favorites. I've rostered him on teams before. I used to love when he would hit the homers, or he hit the one time he hit the homer off Bumgarner and like told him to go get it out of like the ocean, like that type of stuff. His home runs are, they are majestic. Like they're he like really sells out for like a fly ball approach. And the other thing, just last thing about him is like his homers, and I don't even know if this is like a true stat, but like it just feels like they're always of like the 2-run, 3-run variety. Again, probably has a lot to do with being in that lineup, of course. But that's how we were talking about. You get 2 3-run homers in a week, and just like what that does for scoring. He's a guy that gets on base. And then the very last thing I just want to say to tie all this together is the whole theme of we can't always predict how things are going to like shake out. It's like I think this isn't a Muncie point. I'm going to use him as an example, but it's not just a Muncie point. It's about like so many, players in general. But it's that, from a season-long perspective, like, yeah, my guess is Muncie's probably going to hit like 7th on opening day. Like the way the season shakes out is there's a couple injuries. Now he's hitting cleanup, and it's the Dodgers. And it's when their offense is really hot for a few weeks. And that's all you need. You just need those, like few weeks where he's like hitting your lineup from a late round pick. And so like I'm really trying to picture, how a season plays out with injuries, with guys overperforming, how these profiles score in season. And, kind of like my goal has always been to come up with one big, macro framework that everything can funnel through in that way. And I think that, listening to your guys' breakdown of how teams have shook out from the past few years and the advance rates that different, roster rates have had, that was like the start of it all for me. So I definitely recommend everyone, if you're just getting back into drafting, that you go back and listen to that, even if you've been drafting this whole offseason, but you want to just a little refresher, because I think that helped restart me from ground zero in terms of how I want to think about the game. And yeah.
And every one of those charts is in the Discord, and versions of the chart cut and sliced different ways. So sorted differently. So it highlights infielders or outfielders or such like that. So if it's something that if we didn't cover like a version of it on the show, you can just like message me or find it in the Discord.
Yes. All right. This was an excellent discussion. Brendan, thank you for letting us peer into the the brain mechanism. See that squirrel running around up there. See what it's doing. That's why your cat wanted to get into that baseball squirrel that's up there turning around all the time. So yeah, thank you for joining us again. If you want to support us, you can hit up the YouTube memberships, and then that gets you access to that private Discord. Next week, we should be having a episode with Vlad Sedler, another wonderful baseball mind that we're going to be poking at and prodding at. So be sure to come back for that. The Eliminator has dropped. DraftKings has dropped. So we do also have to figure out fit in some of that discussion in the coming weeks too. And of course, then the position by position breakdowns will be coming in hot as spring training gets underway too. So we got tons of stuff on deck here for the rest of the draft season. We're all deep in our drafts and still enjoying it. It has not gotten to the point where I am feel like I'm clicking the same names over and over again, at least yet. So get out there, get some drafts in. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, Brendan, for both of them and myself. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And yeah, let's go fill some drafts.